When ordering a pint of beer in one of the pubs somewhere in the East End, I encountered a few roughnecks jokingly talking words of abuse about my ethnicity. Standing in front of them, I raised my glass as if nothing had stirred me, and made a few jokes. It was pleasurable to see them stunned and speechless. Asking them about their wellness and the concerns of British soccer clubs, my aim was fulfilled. They became friendly, and one even decided to buy me the next pint. Another told me, "How come you are just like us, yet you speak like the Froggies?" That was a name the English gave to the French. However, wherever I have been, I always endeavored to make friends, and the impressions I created had a lasting effect on them. To my amazement, I discovered some older people who had never been outside their small suburb of London, who looked at me as if I had come from the moon, and when speaking of other cities of the world, they talked about having seen them only on television, or heard about them on the radio. Since my first ever journey to London, I strongly felt that this was my once-upon-a-time home. However, there was a lot more to discover. London is one of the world's historically notable cities. The history of this great city goes back more than 2,000 years. It was the center of the British Empire and also home to a wealth of the world's great artists, well-known poets, and scientists. Visiting this great city was like time travel. Think of Buckingham Palace, Westminster Abbey, and the Tower of London. This tower was very significant when considering certain characters in history. However, apart from what I already knew, I discovered how immense in size everything is. London is indeed a very huge and lively city, containing significant institutions, art galleries, shopping centers, museums, and entertainment venues. It is also very welcoming. Taking all that into account, I started making enquiries to discover more about the history of this tantalizing place. First, I pondered that the best place to visit had to be the library, where I started to research the ancient archives. The actual city was originally established around the City of London, and later Westminster was added. It began as the trading post of the Roman Empire in about 43 AD. The city of Westminster started as the residence of English rulers nearly 1,000 years later. These two areas are now based in the center of today's London. The traffic was very noisy when I stayed there, and I believe it still is. Thousands of people crowd the streets, parks, markets, and department stores. In 1666, London was burned, and during World War II, Nazi German air raids destroyed parts of the city, but the English rebuilt it. When the city expanded, taking in surrounding suburbs, it became known as Greater London. The River Thames flows eastward towards its heart and into the sea. I thoroughly enjoyed flying over London with friends in light aircraft. From that height, one could see a lot more of this magical place. When further up a river, the landscape becomes very hilly. About 40 miles east of London, the Thames empties into the North Sea. I discovered that the city was divided into 32 boroughs, in addition to the historic one, and they each had their own councils. However, a single governing body known as the Greater London Council has authority over the whole area. Central London covers almost 10 square miles on both sides of the great north-south bend in the Thames, and the most popular areas are based here. Central London is divided into three main sections: the City, West End, and South Bank. London Bridge, Tower Bridge, Westminster Bridge, and others link South Bank with the West End and the City. When one travels on a motorbike, one soon discovers the beauty of the oldest part, the walled city of London, which has stood for centuries. The dome of St. Paul's Cathedral towers over the city buildings. One of my favorite edifices is Guildhall, and some parts of this architecture date as far back as the 1400s. According to information, it has been an administrative center for a very long time. The city's Lord Mayor resides in Mansion House, and this tradition dates back to the 1700s. The city is so well planned that the West End boasts a lively retail industry and also a very colorful nightlife. In fact, some religious bodies call it Sin City. The main government buildings are located in southwest London. The Houses of Parliament are one of the best known and tower over the Thames. Number 10 Downing Street is the home of Britain's Prime Minister, which is just off Whitehall, and Buckingham Palace is situated short distance from here. At night, the West End becomes a hub of entertainment with its theatres and cinemas. The main entertainment and shopping district emerge from two intersections, one of which is Trafalgar Square. This is an open area with fountains and statues. On Sunday outings with friends visiting the Strand and Whitehall, where streets from the Upper West End meet at this square, has always been like visiting a different world. The intersections where Piccadilly Circus is 6 streets converge. It is no wonder that many of London's finest shops are found here along Oxford, Bond, and Regent Streets. I believe Piccadilly is still the largest entertainment district in London. Some parts of the city are better appreciated when visiting the place on foot. London's South Bank is a large cultural centre, and this is where we discover County Hall, which is the headquarters of the Greater London Council. We were told that along the curve of the Thames it has been developing slowly, and the real estate has become very expensive. Interestingly, most of the areas surrounding central London are residential. The heavily built-up area around London progressively opens up to more pleasant and spacious communities. Outside this area is London's green belt, so planned as to limit overcrowding, and beyond this belt one discovers the new towns. Like many Londoners, I would personally like to invest in real estate here. Staying with friends from Redbridge, Havering, and Bexley made me realize that I would feel more at home if I chose to live in Britain. One of my friends, who I met on the university campus, invited me to stay with her for a short while in the Kent area of Bexley. There was a time when I stayed at a hotel in London called the Bloomsbury and found myself in the middle of a fantasy film convention. It was exciting, as this was something I was very passionate about. Downstairs, where refreshments were served, I met some of the main Doctor Who characters. There were feature books as well as comic books to buy, and a number of films were shown. They had a number of tea speakers and other professionals, including discussion panels. The whole event was meticulously organized. Discovering such an interest in science fiction made me even more desirous to settle in London. When staying not far from Regent Street, I frequented several newsagents, which not only sold newspapers but all kinds of other books and magazines. One of my favorite newsagents was around Leopold Street. I remember it as if it was yesterday. I bought several Superman comics, some Starlog, and science magazines from them. My friend's grandparents once lived in Wimbledon in a very old-fashioned house where I stayed for a weekend. However, I loved living in Kensington, often visiting the science and natural history museums. One other fascination on my part was the Peter Pan statue in Kensington Gardens. He was the hero of a play by Sir James Barrie. It was about a boy who refused to grow up, and I used to tell my children this story when they were very young. Peter persuaded Wendy, John, and Michael Darling to fly with him and a fairy Tinker Bell to Never Never Land. For a few days I stayed in Camden Town and surroundings with one of my other friends, while always desirous to return to South Bank and even Vauxhall. I was so thankful to my wonderful friends who encouraged me to visit this fantastic city and stay with them. Those friends were the best of the best in understanding people, although some were a little eccentric, following interesting belief systems and spiritualism. It gave me a great chance to get to know some of London's characteristics. It was certainly wonderful to frequent Kensington Gardens, Hyde Park, and Regent's Park, where we have enjoyed performances in the open-air theatre. I also remember the black-and-white photographs which I took in Green Park and St. James Park. An issue which still surprises me is this. Although the city is so huge, many Londoners consider themselves as belonging to certain districts like Soho, Hampstead, or Chelsea, and very rarely to London. When considering that, it might be why these districts have kept their unique characteristics. During my stay, Chelsea was populated with entertainers and artists, whereas Soho was crowded with various nationalities who ran delicatessens and restaurants. Just by walking along the street, one would feel lost, as if somewhere else around the world, as one would hear many other languages. In the East End, Cockneys considered themselves as the real Londoners. To be a true Cockney, you had to be born within the sound of the bells of St. Mary-le-Bow and Historic Church. However, I believe most Londoners originated from a line of British-born ancestors. Let us not forget that the city has also attracted many of its residents from outside Great Britain. Many were the children and grandchildren of immigrants. When traveling around the city, I noticed that Soho had more French and Italian ancestry. For some reason, the western part of the city, such as Hammersmith, attracted Australians, Indians, and the Eastern Europeans. The East End had a large Jewish population, but I was told that the wealthy moved to the West End. The religious identities of Londoners were also varied. There were all kinds of churches, from the Church of England to Roman Catholic ones, Jewish synagogues, and even Muslim houses of worship. There are also many other sectarian churches, and a number of kingdom halls in the suburbs. A large number of Londoners live in the outer boroughs. Some well-known ones are far from central London. The more heavily populated residential areas of the city lie in the inner boroughs. London's slums around these sections are in complete contrast to the wealthier areas. Interestingly also, lower-class housing in the inner boroughs are in Westminster and the borough of Kensington, as well as Chelsea, and Westminster covers much of the West End. London has always been Great Britain's main centre for advanced study and research. Admittedly, I felt privileged, having met some genuine friends working in or studying at the University of London, which is Britain's largest university. It has many colleges and medical schools, and a large number of institutes. London has a number of smaller colleges, specializing in arts and engineering. Kensington was a good choice to live, as far as I was concerned, for I could easily travel everywhere from there. I was very decisive to continue furthering my education if I remained in London, and wondered if I could also be employed in the education sector. However, one needed to stay there a lot longer to get to know London and Great Britain better. Every corner of this magnificent city offered something different, something useful, something educational and entertaining. As you can tell, I love London and still miss it. When one lives in this city, one easily becomes addicted to it. Can one easily forget one's former nightmares and start a new line of thought, a new way of living, and a brand new dream? You might think that I was attempting something very courageous. Undeniably, I was my happiest in London after the traumatic nightmares I needed to wake up from. After a few months of staying there, something very strange started to happen to me. I was dreaming of my young son, whom I never had a proper opportunity to get to know. Jehovah's Witnesses, through his mother, had all the access to him, and probably so indoctrinated the poor boy that it would be impossible to get to know him any longer. Indeed, what God put together should no man put asunder had to be different with the witnesses. Those dreams kept haunting me until finally, with the encouragement of one of my lady friends, I visited the British Spiritualist group, although I had my doubts. One afternoon we attended a special service there. A psychic medium told me that my family was separated, and some time later, before my growing old, my children would come back to me. This surprised me, and yet, as I said before, I could no longer believe in anything. I became forever critical. I said nothing to my friend, but it awakened an interest in me to conduct research into this field, and see why people believed in such matters. I was cognizant about these issues, and that there were so many people wanting to believe in things which could not be proven. There were too many myths to contend with. I also had most unusual and not fully explainable experiences to consider. Over the years, I have met a large number of spiritually inclined people capable of guessing reasonably correctly what a near-future event could be. Others were capable of knowing about people's loved ones who have been dead for a long time, bringing comforting news about them. Some sounded very genuine, but others were doing it purely to earn some money. It certainly made me very curious, and I felt the need to experiment and see if I could do it also. I had previously experimented with matters relating to altered consciousness and hypnosis. Some of the psychics I encountered claimed to channel to higher intelligences, even to extragalactic people, under trance, but I wanted to see tangible evidence about their authenticity without being overly critical. I contemplated how my ex-wife would consider me if she knew what I wanted to experiment with. Probably in utter fear of sinning against the spirit, and yet the only book she preferred to read was full of those psychic endeavors, while that same literature had tendencies to condemn everything of that nature. Maybe I was subjected to erroneous interpretations of the scriptures and did not realize it at the time. Fanatical sectarian Christian groups, taking that book literally, do the same. I was fascinated with people who claimed they could utilize psychic energies and move physical objects or take psychic photographs, where others apparently from different dimensions would make themselves visible. I started taking pictures of people and places more often, analyzing them under a microscope, but I discovered nothing psychically explainable for a very long time. That was until I decided to look at my old photograph albums. I was beginning to see what I thought were imaginary images of other people. It was similar to looking at clouds and seeing ever-changing shapes of things, animals and people. When I was a child, I often used to watch them with my brother. My mother read coffee grounds and tea leaves for friends for the fun of it, but she did not take it very seriously. She was able to see images in those cups and interpret them, and, if it provided some comfort for people, or they were entertained by it, she was happy. There were a few Jehovah's Witnesses who considered it as a practice of witchcraft, and talked against my mother as if she was a great sinner, according to their supposed Bible teachings. My mother was a very honest and loving person who never wanted to hurt anybody, and sacrificed a lot of things in order to make our lives happy. I found those accusations against her very distasteful and hard to take. Frankly, there are so many unknowns about physical life and the brain. I believe that we can discover a lot more about ourselves if we are prepared to research into our minds without bias and prejudice. I was going to study certain aspects of human characteristics and trends which are completely hidden from sight. For example, why did people claim they could see other beings when the majority of us could not? Was it only in their imagination, or were they hallucinating under the influence of habit-forming drugs or alcohol? Some people claimed to see and encounter extraterrestrials, like I had. If I could go along with my own experiences, which were very real to me, what others claimed might be equally real to them. It was probably expressed within their own truth, as they believed, and it was, therefore, far better not to criticize, but rather study the nature of their claims. I always prefer to put my personal experiences to the test, and see if they could be reproduced under the conditions in which they occurred in the first instance. However, some experiences, like the spirit images of people and places I captured on film without using cameras, could not be reproduced, no matter how hard I tried. I remember Zig Ziglar's wise words: "Of all the attitudes we can acquire, surely the attitude of gratitude is the most important and by far most life-changing." In fact, my returning to London helped me wonderfully to overcome some of my personal problems. Indeed, I had forgiven those real evildoers who were separating families because either husbands or wives have moved out of their so-called truths, living a worldly life in a world their Creator had apparently so loved, according to their teachings, and gave His only begotten Son. Interestingly, however, they keep repeating that they do not encourage the married couples to separate. I still have great hope that they will one day soon be able to learn the real truth. When I was very young, and in my late teens, the witness friends continually opposed my willingness to educate myself, later encouraging me not to be involved with the opposite sex or get married, believing that the end was extremely close, as in 1975. They discouraged others in their midst from starting anything beneficial in their lives. When the overseer of their congregation suggested that I should read 1 Timothy 4, verses 1 to 3, I wondered how many times he had read it before, and how he interpreted. It says, "Now the Spirit speaketh expressly, that in the later times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of the devils, speaking lies in hypocrisy, having their conscience seared with a hot iron, forbidding to marry, and commanding to abstain from meats, which God hath created to be received with thanksgiving of them, which believe and know the truth." A friend asked me only recently if I had forgiven my ex-wife for everything she has done, knowingly or unknowingly. But was there anything to forgive? We are told that God forgives. We are also told that love, which is one of the attributes of God, is forgiving. One can therefore conclude that unforgiveness is from the evil, not from God. However, as far as I am concerned, anybody who cannot forgive may be somebody who has not been able to think for oneself or be permitted to live independently due to religious intolerance. Magda's so-called beloved brothers and sisters must certainly have controlled her every move, in the process rendering her vulnerable and dependent on them. As I understood, she could only function within a very limited framework based upon Jehovah's Witness principles, where the world is considered as being ruled over by Satan the devil. The only way to have everlasting life in that world after Armageddon, according to their interpretation of the Bible, is through absolute dedication to their organization without question. I cannot forget how they used every conceivable opportunity to judge and paint me as greatly unfaithful, a liar, a cheat, and a fornicator, with a harlot of the world, to justify their cultist viewpoints and decision to disfellowship me. I was not the only one treated this way. There are a vast number of others condemned to eternal hellfire, like myself. The witnesses are either blind to the facts or completely incapable of understanding what harm they cause to others in the name of a supreme God under the umbrella of righteousness. I can only hope that they will start to understand what true righteousness is, not just by reading from the Bible in parrot fashion without really understanding. One hopes that they truly have the love of God in their hearts as they passionately preach. When we were finally divorced, I told Magda that one such experience was enough for a lifetime, and I would probably never again attempt to get married, and if by any chance we met, we would have grown frail and gray, and that if she had any love remaining in her heart and began to understand the situation, it would be too late to rekindle the old flames we may have once dreamt of. She showed no reaction. It might have been due to my outlandish language from another planet which she could not comprehend. However, forgiveness does not signify weakness, and it does not declare any admission of vulnerability or feeling guilty for one's past nightmares. Therefore, it is important to make a firm decision to forgive whatever the hurt was and bury it. In other words, deciding that those past nightmares, blaming, condemnations, and misunderstandings will never bother us any longer. We need to feel free so that we can go ahead and advance in our undertakings. Furthermore, what else could I do other than forgive her, as well as my daughters, for they did not know what they were doing? No matter what they may invent and claim about me, who they treated like an absolute nothing, they were completely blinded by their allegedly truth-loving mother under the umbrella of the cult she belonged to. Besides, I never believe in dwelling on past mistakes forever, because it never takes us anywhere. Both my daughters have been very naive and mentally very young when they completely abandoned me, leaving their mother and her faithful friends to feel triumphant. Their hateful and angry world certainly included almost all man-made belief systems wherein their mother was sucked in. In reality, I really believe that they loved and trusted her more, following the mother knows best principle. I am certainly not going to oppose them with their decision to be whatever they chose. Perhaps they needed to wait until they could understand that their mother was never really free. She was certainly not herself, as anybody with some intellect would understand, for her entire personality was sadly stolen away and replaced with a cultist model where she sought divine wisdom and happiness, believing in only those scriptures as interpreted by her so-called brothers. I sincerely hope that she has found what she sought, but with a brain completely drained of common sense and a questioning mind, one would only be able to think within the framework of those who believe to themselves being so righteous whilst groping in total darkness. It is a state they themselves could not comprehend, thus condemning everything in the world. Praise ye the Lord, and everything will be given unto thee. Alas, it does not happen that way. My daughters had the added disadvantage of trying to learn everything from their all-knowing school friends, wherein their parents were seen as unwanted hindrances to their supposed progression. However, when fools lead the other fools, they can only create a world of fools, groping in complete ignorance. I knew that my daughters considered me as the evil man, thanks to the grandparents on their mother's side, as I was not a member of the perfect race, and also thanks to their mother's faithful friends, who were ever ready to destroy the unfaithful as they judged them. All disfellowshipped were allegedly evil, believing it was Jehovah's decision and judgment. After being told something of this nature, I could not accept any falsehood in regard to the existence of such a cruel deity they worshipped. However, since they claim to know the Bible truths, perhaps they should revisit Romans chapter 14, verse 13, where it clearly states, "Let us not therefore judge one another any more, but judge this rather, that no man put a stumbling block or an occasion to fall in his brother's way." One of my daughters had a further handicap, for otherwise what kind of child would attempt to harm her father just because he had not allowed her to have her way with those boyfriends, let her take drugs, and not allow her to eat only McDonald's food, and make her work like a slave for 2 weeks as a school assignment? It therefore seemed she had every reason to destroy him. Although she was resentful towards her mother, who chose the Jehovah's Witness faith over her family, my daughter was completely drilled by her about the wicked world I belonged to, for not being faithful to what she believed in, thus following every dictate issued forth from her mother precisely. I am unable to forget everything I was subjected to, no matter how hard I try. My only consolation was the hope that she would grow out of it when she matured. I was certain of the validity of my claims in this regard, because it was impossible to dismiss what one observed when Annette was with her mother. During my most vulnerable times, emotionally devastated and suffering from an unexpected hernia, duodenal ulcer, and inflamed urinary tract, needing several medical treatments, I cannot forget what my wonderful daughter told me in front of her sister Birgit. That was the icing on the cake. Her attitude really stunned me as she continued, "Dad, I can have you put behind bars. Do you know how? You will see." I was puzzled, asking myself, is this what I deserved? I knew she was leading a very loose and sexually active life, according to a number of her friends, neighbors, and teachers, but I was not meant to know. Was that because she wanted to sleep with her 3 boyfriends and had invited them in before my arrival home from work? I cannot forget how I was almost stopped by those boys from entering my own home. She told me exactly as I remember, "Why did you have to come home now, Dad?" As I briefly mentioned, I ignored it and told the boys to pack up and go. Apprehensively they left, but I could not ignore how angry Annette was, not talking to me for days. I remember how she was begging me to go and sleep at Regis' place just for tonight. When the boys left, she told me if I asked them, they could kill you. You are a fucking bastard. Did you see how strong they were? They are muscle-bound, you know? Alas, I can never forget this chilly episode. Yes, even this I have forgiven, because people are bound to make mistakes. I might sound like I am repeating myself, but simply sweeping things under the carpet is something I could not do, and there are things one cannot easily forget. On the other hand, I have always been friendly with people, even if I did not know them well, and some were really kind. I met some of them at the VSU, who invited my daughter Annette and me to their home in the country Victoria when she was still very young, begging me to stay there a little longer. I have told you about this story. Here is a little further analysis of this unwanted memory. It seemed that they had already decided for me, suggesting that I could leave Annette there. After lengthy forensic research, the child was found at her mother's. This scenario was engineered to paint me as an irresponsible, incapable parent. In this analysis, it is clearly evident that the situation could only have been orchestrated by a real evil force. When we were invited to have one more court hearing, Annette was not comparable to her former self. She did not smile and was not excited seeing me after such a drastic separation. She was like an emotionless robot, and I was very certain that she was under some form of hypnotic trance. That must have made her mother exceedingly happy, believing that her prayers were answered. It was impossible to dismiss when looking at Magda's face. One thing I have been so absolutely certain of was that the cult those people belonged to, pretending to be friends in the first place, were widely using hypnosis, as they previously mentioned, declaring that it was for the greatest good. I am not accusing anyone by this statement, only making my own observations. I can never forget Magda's words when she said, "My God Jehovah heard my prayers." I know these following words may be classified as harsh, but they need to be said nevertheless. Could Jehovah be a mask used by the devil? But after the court decided to return the child back to her father, I'm sure that those witnesses must have felt distraught, just like Magda, their beloved sister, did. Annette's behavior towards me has never been idealistic following that wretched situation. She was extremely argumentative about everything, and it was so reminiscent of her dear mother's behavior. Psalm 62, verse 9 declares, "Surely men of low degree are vanity, and men of high degree are a lie. To be laid in the balance, they are altogether lighter than vanity." She was trying to instruct me about everything, endeavoring to give me orders about how I should live my life, and blaming me for every conceivable situation. I kept quiet, as if nothing happened, and this new condition continued for a considerable length of time. Even this I have forgiven. However, I did not desire to provide any reason to be condemned for doing wrong either. I could not stop her or anybody else if they decided to think of me as bad, for I had to be the evil man. However, I had my principles and responsibilities as a parent. I knew I had been blamed by the witnesses, and particularly by Magda, as an extremely bad parent, for I was not in their truth. Anybody who was an intellectual and academic was not to their liking. I had no choice but also forgive Birgit, who left after leaving a torn piece of paper on which she scribbled, "You can live with our memories." Obviously, she did not realize how much she hurt me. All I could say was, "Thanks for the memories." Later, I was to discover that when Annette went to her mother's, her very first action was to attack her with a pair of scissors. Since they could only see me as the evil unadvised from the witnesses, I am certain that they took Annette's ungainly behavior as being my responsibility. Did they know by any chance that I was completely against all kinds of violence and hatred? Yet after accusing me with an unthinkable and shocking situation, as previously mentioned, with some reservation and exceeding sadness, I realized how Annette wanted to punish me, and even completely destroy me. I was extremely shocked and surprised when I discovered her in my bedroom, where she was never invited. Years later, I learned that she was paying large sums of money to her friends or male clients to bash me up and spill my brains on the roadside. Birgit was seemingly begging her not to do something like that. What Jehovah's Witnesses have done through my ex-wife and her daughters under her strict disciplines against me has never been anything other than the pure evil. Now she can behave as if she is one of the most righteous women in the world, being praised by her current family of Jehovah's Witnesses in their weekly gatherings. I regret being where I was, when and who I was during those times of devastation. Repeating myself, I am sorry for having had the custody of my daughters. In all honesty, I regretted having become their father. Maybe I should have left her precious daughters to her to be looked after in her elders' special care.